7:15, the Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones told Checkpoint the review didn't go far enough.
There are a host of other deeper issues. Number one, to do with the structure of competitiveness. Number two, to do with what can the state and the Crown, this government, do to encourage the development of open banking, which is a feature of overseas economies. We should be looking at ways to reduce the cost of banking, the ease of banking, the spread of banking, and not just allowing the Aussie-owned banks to continue to spirit out $5.5 billion.
With us now, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson. Good morning.
Morning.
Is Shane Jones right that there is essentially gouging going on here and it's not sustainable for the economy for $5.5 billion to be going offshore every year?
Well, in fairness to this report, that's not exactly what it was about. I mean, this was focusing on these specific issues around culture and conduct. And
but does he have a point?
A lot to do there. Look, I think a lot of New Zealanders look at the scale of those profits and they do question them. We'd be having a very different conversation, though, if banks were making losses. So we do need a strong banking sector in New Zealand. But as the Prime Minister said yesterday, banks operate here not by right, but as a privilege. And as a result, we've got to make sure that they are fulfilling their social licence.
Would there appear to be a sustainable culture of doing the right thing from the banks if at the same time, as we heard there in that report, the customers have a number on their head? Yeah,
I think that's one of the really big lessons here is that the banks spend a lot of time thinking about immediate customer satisfaction, but not about long-term customer outcomes. And the report really points them to the fact that they need to think, for example, about the value of a product to a customer over their whole lifetime, their whole work with the bank, as opposed to the immediate moment. So, no, I actually think this is where banks do have to up their game, think about the customer's overall experience and the outcomes for them, not just selling them a product.
And how does that happen?
Well, that happens by us making sure we've got the regulatory system in place. One of the recommendations in the report is we actually establish a legal duty for banks to think about a customer's long-term outcomes. It also changes by the bank's own behaviour, and I think one of the really good developments over this whole period has been the shift away from the incentives around sales for frontline staff. That had to end, and I'm pleased that the report says it will.
Interesting, though, earlier we heard from the head of ANZ, I think it was, who said that they'd got rid of these sales targets right throughout their management structure, from frontline right the way up. And actually very little had changed. So what does that tell us?
Well, it depends a little bit how each bank was using it. But the point is that we saw in the report around, 24% of people thought that they were offered a product that they didn't need. 15% felt pressured to take it. That's far too many. It should be zero, in fact, for the latter of those. And so we've got to make sure that every bank does that. If they don't, by the 1st of March next year, then not only will they be named and shamed by the FMA and the Reserve Bank, but we'll have to be put in a position to move against that.
Named and shamed is one thing. Move against them, how exactly? What is the penalty?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we'll take advice on that now, but the message is very, very clear. There is no place for those sort of incentives around volume of sales for frontline staff.
So will you regulate?
If we have to, yes, we will. But I think the banks in that particular issue are moving away from that. What the report highlights, though, is that there are a wider set of issues around the whole systems for managing risk, for making sure that there is good conduct, for making sure that the overall customer experience is counted. That's where we may need to move in a regulatory way.
If you were going to regulate, when would it happen and what would it look like?
Well, we'll take a look too at the Australian report. I think it's really important that we get the final Australian Royal Commission in February, cross-check that against the recommendations from here to make sure we've got a full picture, see where the banks get by the beginning of March. If they haven't moved, then we'll move quickly after that.
Appreciate your time. Grant Robertson there, the Finance Minister, speaking about that banks report that came out yesterday. It's 7:17.
A spot of traffic news. There's been a crash in the Auckland suburb of